Hello and welcome into another episode of Lockdown Wolves. Today on the show, getting you ready for Game 2 tonight. We'll talk about three-point shooting. Was it flukily bad for Minnesota in Game 1? Or is OKC just that good at protecting the three-point line? We'll also talk SGA's whistle and small ball lineups. It's all upcoming. Welcome in. You are Lockdown Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Lockdown Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Today's episode is brought to us by our friends at FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Happy Thursday, everybody. Happy game day. It is Game 2 of the Western Conference Finals. Of course, the Wolves down by 1 in the series already after what turned into a blowout loss was much closer than the final score indicated. Today on the show, I want to dive into, I think, the biggest headline from Game 1, which is the three-point shooting for Minnesota, because everything played out almost exactly how I at least anticipated. I think a lot of people did, as we talked about on Wednesday's show, and I'll kind of hit that quickly here off the top. But I want to talk about the three-point shooting and how sustainable is OKC's three-point defense. If I don't mean to put on YouTube, I put it in air quotes. I don't mean to put that in air quotes. It is legit. And we'll talk about like, where does this fall on the scale of OKC just does a great job of contesting threes versus Minnesota had bad luck in Game 1. Where does this fall on that spectrum? And I think the answer is, as you might expect, somewhere in the middle. And I think it's a pretty interesting thing to monitor looking forward. And also, if OKC doesn't give up corner threes, what do they give up if they choose to adjust their game plan at all in Game 2? So we'll talk about that in the context of the playoffs. I also want to get into the SGA whistle, mostly because there were some Locked On NBA comments on it, and I want to kind of dive into that. We'll also talk about the small lineups for Minnesota and another Locked On NBA thought from our guys over there that thought Minnesota Chris Finch messed that up a little bit. So we'll dig into all that today on the show. Big thank you off the top for making this show your first listen every day. Of course, you can listen anywhere. You can also watch on YouTube as well as the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. All right. So when I say the game played out as expected, I don't want to rehash yesterday's show entirely, but the cliff notes are that the high points, the Wolves shot a ton of corner threes. OKC allowed them to. Minnesota turned it over a bunch. OKC ran out and scored a bunch in transition. And SGA got to the line a bunch. Those things all were expected, and they all happened. What wasn't expected was Minnesota shooting, whatever percentage that was, a miserable percentage. It was 29.4%. Not exactly Game 5 against the Lakers or Game 1 against the Warriors bad, but really bad. That wasn't expected. Minnesota getting clobbered on points of the paint, like 50-something to 20, was not expected either, being a minus 30-plus in the paint. And the other thing is we knew Minnesota would turn the ball over. The dangerous thing is how many of those are live ball turnovers. Minnesota turned it over 18 times in this game, and OKC had 13 steals. Now, could have expected that a lot of those turnovers were going to be steals because of the length, athleticism, and scheme that the Thunder play. But that's exactly what happened. And OKC scored like 31 points off those 18 turnovers, which is just bonkers. But they're so good in the open floor, and the Wolves have been so careless on the perimeter with the basketball, not just on the perimeter. They had a lot of back down in the low post. Julius, Randle, Reid, not even the low post, just put your back to the basket turnovers because OKC is swiping and coming from the corners and just being aggressive. And Minnesota did not play that well. The three-point shooting to me is the most intriguing situation because if Minnesota just simply shoots a reasonable percentage on those threes, many of which were open, they may win this game. Remember, they were up 9 with exactly a minute left in the second quarter, and Mike Conley missed a step back three that would have pushed it to 12 with under a minute to play in the second quarter. Minnesota ended up only being up by 4 at halftime. They were still up by 4 midway through the third quarter, and things completely flipped as OKC just like went nuts. And they do that. They do it on their home floor, especially. And that was a problem for Minnesota. But if the Wolves just hit a reasonable number of their threes, they're going to be okay. Now, the Wolves have lost 3 games in the playoffs so far. They're currently 8-3 in the playoffs. Of the 3 games they've lost, they've scored 88, 88, and 85 points. 85 being that Game 2 against the Lakers, 88 in Game 1 against the Warriors, 88 in Game 1 against OKC. In those 3 games, the Wolves have shot just terribly from outside the arc. That's the common thread here. Game 2 against the Lakers, Minnesota was 20.8% on threes. They did not make a corner three in that game, but they lost 94-85. Game 1 against the Warriors, they shot 17.2%. I'm using cleaning the glass, by the way, which takes out heaves. So if you actually look at just the regular box score, I think it was under 15% from three. Cleaning the glass will take out the heaves. So actual like half court 3-point attempts, 17.2%. So call it 21% against the Lakers in that loss, 17% in the loss to Golden State. And then last night against OKC, or Tuesday night against OKC, 30.6% from three. What's the common thread here? Well, they shot miserably from three. They scored 88 or less points in all three of those games. And until the Thunder game, they held their opponent under 100 points in each of those games as well. So not only was last night the one of the worst offensive performances from the Wolves in the playoffs, they gave up more points than in any other game in the playoffs to OKC. Now, granted, some of that was garbage time. But nonetheless, it was also a terrible defensive performance, at least in the second half of this game. They got 70 points in the second half after giving up only, I think, 40 in the first half. So when the Wolves lose in the playoffs, they shoot miserably from beyond the arc. But in every other game, save for Game 5 against Lakers when they were 15% and they won, the Wolves have been basically league average or better. In fact, they haven't been worse than league average from three in any other game in the playoffs. The 3 games they've lost, and then the Game 5 win against Lakers. So 4 of 11 games so far, they've been miserable from three. In the other 7, they've been average or above. 36% or greater. They were 51% in Game 1 against the Lakers. They were in all 4 games against the Warriors after Game 1, they were 38% or better outside the arc. And in 3 of those, they were 43% or better. So they're going to have a stinker in every series. That's happened. They actually had 2 stinkers overall in the Lakers series. They lost one and they won the other. So we figure if this series goes 6 or 7, they're going to have another game like this, and they'll probably lose that game. And that's partly what makes this so frustrating, is this was still a winnable game, despite the issues shooting the three. But my point is, this is the exception, not the rule, at least in terms of Minnesota missing or making those open shots. Now, if you look at the OKC side, in terms of the type of shots that they're allowing, Minnesota shot 23% of their 3-point attempts in this game. Nearly 1 in 4 of their attempts from outside the arc were from the corners. And that's not abnormal. That's, by the way, 100th percentile. If you look at the regular season data, like go through the Wolves game log, and I'm looking on Cleaning the Glass. They did not have another game all season where more than 17% of their 3-point attempts, of their shot attempts, were from the corners. And the other ones that are like 16 or more percent, it's like Houston and then the OKC games. Except for, I guess, the last OKC game. They didn't shoot nearly as many corner threes, the overtime one. But the rest of them were all tons of corner threes against OKC. That's what OKC allows. That's what they allow. You go through the OKC game log, and this is what's fascinating to me. There are only... Well, let's do it this way. OKC's lost 3 games in the postseason as well. All 3 to Denver. Of course, they swept Memphis in just a ridiculously easy series. They lost 3 games to Denver. And those 3 games, they actually didn't allow that many corner threes. Only 10% of Denver shots in the first loss in Game 1 of the second round series were corner threes, which is a really low mark for OKC. And then in the other loss, it was 10% in the Game 6 loss. And then the one in the middle was about 12%. All 3 of those, though, were really low numbers for OKC. In all 3 of those losses, what did they allow? They allowed plenty of attempts at the rim. Denver attempted 41% of their shots at the rim in their Game 6 win. They attempted 27% of their shots at the rim, which is still a high number, in their Game 3 win. And in their Game 1 win, it was 37%, which is a little, actually, yeah, that's an even better number. So the only 3 games where OKC allowed worse than league average at the rim in terms of frequency were the 3 games they lost. So what does that tell us? Well, clearly, OKC's game plan is allowing corner threes and not allowing attempts at the rim, which makes, if you're going to pick one or the other, that makes some sense. If you could trust your length, your athleticism, your speed to get out and contest those corner threes. And OKC does trust that, and it has worked to the tune of a 68-win season and a phenomenal defense throughout the season. But is Minnesota the exception to the rule in terms of their ability to make threes? Well, in Game 1, it wasn't, and OKC won out. I bet over the course of a 7-game series, Minnesota certainly has more shooters than Denver. There's no question about that. Minnesota remains one of the best three-point shooting teams in the league. And Ant and Randle are really good at finding corner shooters in general. And Minnesota, again, attempted a ton of corner threes, nearly 1 in 4 of their three-point attempts. So basically, like, I think it was 10 or 12 of their three-point attempts, so their 51 three-point attempts were from the corners. And they shot terribly from the corners. If they make a couple more corner threes, this is a completely different game. And if OKC, this is their strategy. This is what they do. And they're not necessarily going to be as lucky as they were in this game about Minnesota missing as many as they did. And again, all of these things can be true. The Wolves got good looks in game one. OKC's really good at contesting three-pointers, the best in the league by far. And the Timberwolves will be better than they were in game one outside the arc. They're not going to shoot, again, by the box score, 29% from three. At least not maybe one more time. If this series goes at least 6 games, they might do it one more time. And hopefully it's not game 2. But they're not going to do that every night. All of the above can be true. I'm not saying the Wolves are going to, blow the Thunder out because they're going to have a 50% from 3 shooting game like they did against Lakers. No. OKC is not LA. They're going to get much better contests, which is underselling just how much better OKC is than LA, especially defensively. They're going to get much better contests against the Wolves. But the Wolves aren't going to be this bad moving forward. And so as long as those three-point attempts continue to be there and Minnesota cleans up the decision-making just a little bit, I mean, a lot bit would be better, but even just a little bit, things are going to look different in game 2. All right, I want to talk about a couple of other kind of takeaways from game 1. I do want to talk about the SGA whistle. I think that's an important thing to cover because it is a topic, a hot-button topic. It's out there. I don't want to, as much as I don't like talking about officiating on the show, I think it's important to discuss a little bit here. And then I want to get into some of the lineup items as well. We'll do all that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our title sponsors over at FanDuel. The NBA playoffs are not just in full swing. We are in the conference finals on both sides of the bracket, in both leagues. Every night delivers highlight-worthy performances, major momentum shifts, and can't-miss moments. Whether it's a game-winning shot or a breakout player, there's never been a better time to get in on the action. FanDuel makes it easy to stay in the game before tip-off and live. With player props, performance trends, and same-game parlays, fans have more ways than ever to play smart and win big. For you, maybe it's just during the game. You want to see which players are going to show up at the biggest moments, and you want to just trust that you're going to make the right call in the moment during the game. How could tracking their trends potentially help you build your next bet? That's something you could consider during the live games. You could also combine your live prop bets mid-game based on how the action unfolds. As of right now, the Timberwolves are 7.5-point underdogs against OKC. That number opened at 7.5. I think it was 7 by the time the game started in game 1. It's 7.5 again on Thursday, which is just an insane amount of respect for OKC. And I understand it. It's still a little bit high, I think, for game 2. I mean, we saw the line shift, say Lakers series and the Wolves won game 1 in LA. It shifted heavily the other way. I guess that was a little different because LA was the home team, but that's something to pay attention to. And look, the $200 in bonus bets is an awesome incentive as well. If you're new to FanDuel, it's the perfect time to sign up. Again, the $200 in bonus bets. Head to FanDuel.com, place your first $5 bet. If it wins, you'll get $200 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. Okay. That's all I have to say about the 3-point shooting. I'll hit my last 3 real quick. The Wolves got good looks in game 1. That'll continue to happen. OKC's great at contesting. That'll continue to happen. And the Wolves will be better outside the arc. How does that play out over the course of the series? If the Wolves happen to have 2 more bad shooting games, then they're in big trouble. If they have 1 more, they might be able to survive it. If they are, it's like the LA series, and like for the next 4 games, they're great and they can win 3 of those. And you get to a game 6, up 3-2 or something crazy. Like, obviously a lot more things need to go right. It's not strictly 3-point shooting, but that is the biggest, most fixable thing that went exactly as expected, except for the Wolves missing open shots. Can that come back around? Can Nikhil and Naz and Dante, among others, just shoot better from outside the arc? I think the short answer is yes. Another thing we expected to happen that did happen was Shai Gilgeous-Alexander doing Shai Gilgeous-Alexander things, by the way, now officially the league's MVP, which I think is correct. I think SGA should win MVP. It does not mean I have to think his game is aesthetically pleasing. It does not mean I have to like the way that he grifts. I think grifting is a good word for it, for foul calls. And again, others have said this, and I'm going to play a clip from Locked On NBA here in a second, where Matt Moore and Hayes do a really good job of breaking the issue down. So actually, I'll let their words do it. But real quickly, in terms of games against the Wolves this season, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is averaging in the regular season. SGA is averaging 12 free throw attempts per game. He had 48 free throw attempts over 4 games, 35 points per game against Minnesota. And he was over 51% from the field. He also shot the three really well. He was 0 for 4 in game 1. And remember, late in that fourth and final regular season meeting between OKC and Minnesota, when the Wolves were down 24 in the fourth quarter, came back and won in overtime. They completely blitzed SGA, like sold out to blitz him, and played the other 4 guys with 3 guys, and it worked. They didn't try that all in game 1, which I get it. That's a desperate strategy, and it's a way to lose pretty quickly if the other guys are on, which for OKC, they weren't in the first half of this game, of game 1, but they were in the second half. And again, the Wolves never blitzed aggressively in game 1 of the Western Conference Finals, as they did in desperation mode, down 20 plus in the fourth quarter of the regular season game. I think that is a true desperation move, but I wonder if the Wolves do mix in a bit more blitzing against SGA. But the point here, the free throw attempts is crazy. I want to play the clips from Locked On NBA. First, I'm going to play a clip from Matt Moore, who talks about the uneven whistle that Shai Gilgeous-Alexander gets. Matt is, of course, one of the Locked On Nuggets hosts. He's HP or Hardwood Paroxysm on HP Basketball on X. So undoubtedly, many of you follow him. He does a great job with the Nuggets show. And then also Hayes from Locked On Bulls. This is Matt talking about the uneven whistle for Shai Gilgeous-Alexander in game 1 of the conference finals.
This was an uneven whistle. Sometimes you get whistles that are, you can do whatever you want on the interior, but you can't do anything on the perimeter. And sometimes you have games where it's the opposite, where it's like, no. If you're in the inside, lots of fouls on offensive rebounds, but there's more contact allowed on the perimeter. And sometimes, that's what you want. You want it to be balanced all over the floor, like physicality. This was a simply uneven game where for one player, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, he got touch fouls, and then Alex Caruso is out there committing judo, and there's no call. And it's absolutely insane. And I understand that it's like, oh, well, you're a Nuggets guy. I'm not a Nuggets fan. I do the Locked On Nuggets podcast because I'm here in Denver. That's the team I cover. I'm telling you, there is an unevenness that's what bothered people last night. Now, I will say this. The Wolves' discipline was horrendous. You can't put your hand on his back when he's driving. He's going to flail, and he's going to look like he's getting pushed. And they're going to call a push on a back on a drive every time. Julius Randle's reaching, Hayes. Their discipline was atrocious as far as the Wolves go. But I can't sit here and say that the Thunder's was great. They were grabbing, pushing, holding everything, and not getting called. I'm hopeful that with just a different set of officials, I think the officials had a really hard time last night with trying to officiate that game evenly with how Shai played.
It's hard to disagree with that. Minnesota, yeah, they deserve blame for being overly aggressive at times. And again, I know that Thunder fans are going to hear this and scream, well, OKC only shot 5 more free throws. And, Minnesota only committed, actually both teams were called for 22 personal fouls in this game. Yeah, that's fine. But if one team fouls 40 times, it gets called 22 times. The other team fouls 25 times, it gets called 22 times. Which team got the short end of the stick? And maybe Minnesota should have been more physical in other situations in the game. Maybe it's OKC's more aggressive way out on the perimeter when there isn't, a potential shot attempt in question. I think that is part of it, is understanding that and being more physical, I guess, 30 feet from the basket, because you figure they're less likely to call it. And then you get inside the arc, and if you're physical with SGA there, he's going to just hoist the ball at the rim. I mean, there was one that didn't get called because the contact actually there were 2, but there was one that he took like a leaner at the free throw line. He was off balance, just chucked it up, got nothing but backboard. And it was just strictly grifting, looking for a foul call that never came. And you're going to get a couple of those a game, but you're also going to get some like the crazy N1 that Doris Burke was just like, how did he make that shot? Well, it was impressive because he was throwing himself to the ground and was completely parallel to the hardwood, like 6 inches off the ground, and throwing it up off the glass, and it went in. Like, that is pretty incredible, but it has nothing to do with Jaden McDaniel's phantom foul call on him. And to Matt's point, did he have his hand on his back lightly? Yeah. Is that a foul? No. But it's going to get called if SGA behaves that way. And to his last point, I'm not super hopeful that a different set of officials will see things in a different way. I don't know that that's the case at all, because we've seen it over the course of the season. We've seen SGA, again, in the regular season against Minnesota, shoot 12 per game. For the season, he actually only shot quote unquote, 8.8 free throws per game, which is less than he shot 2 years ago, his first All-Star season. He shot 11 free throws per game. And he shot nearly 9 per game this season. So I don't necessarily think this is going to look different when you get a different set of officials in there. I think it's going to look a lot the same. That's just what happens with SGA, and it's frustrating. And it's frustrating. I think what's most frustrating is the physicality level in the playoffs and the what should be allowed and what is often allowed but isn't here. Next, I want to hit a clip from the same show. Hayes from Locked On Bulls kind of chimes in with some of that same sentiment, but we're gonna do that here next. All right. Hayes from Locked On Bulls has some thoughts on the physicality that was not allowed on both ends of the floor in game 1 of the conference finals.
If that's even across the board, great. That's just how the game's going to be called that day. We're going to call every touch foul possible. If it's even across the board, great. If that's what you want to do. I like the more physical side of it, but okay, cool. At least it's even. Last night it was not even. And regardless if it's just Shai and the foul merchant thing or whatever, you could tell that game was not being officiated the same way across the board. And that's where people do have the right to be upset and to call foul on that, because we should all be called the same way. If you're going to call something on one side, call it on the other.
I can't disagree with any of that. And that was the issue here. A couple of these, maybe they weren't fouls at all. But fine, then how does Anthony Edwards not get to the free throw line more often? And granted, it is true in this game, they were not getting into the paint as often. They scored 20 points in the paint, and that is in part the Wolves' own fault. But I go back to the point I made a minute ago, last segment, after I played the clip from Matt, is with how physical the Thunder were on the perimeter, 30 feet from the basket, you can't turn a corner when somebody's pushing you, grabbing you, whatever. If you can't turn the corner to get into the paint and you're not going to call the hand check on the perimeter, then OKC, like, that's the strategy. It's the whole, well, they can't call everything strategy, and they're less likely to call the touch, quote unquote, touch foul that is still a foul. And as Matt eloquently put it, committing judo when it comes to Alex Caruso. If you're not going to call that, but I can't get around you to get into the paint, then I can't get into the paint in order to get the foul call that SGA is getting. The consistency needs to be much better from the NBA officiating crew. And, I rewind to segment 1. If Minnesota hits threes, it doesn't matter. They win. And so that's like, this is all kind of baked into the series. It's just frustrating that it was this level in game 1. Do the Wolves still lose if SGA shoots a few less free throws? Probably, yeah. Turns out they ended up losing by 26, even though it was closer than that. Realistically, or in reality, it was closer than that. That's not the point. The point is, well, it's baked into the series. It doesn't make it not frustrating. And Minnesota deserves a little bit of a better whistle, as the series goes on. And it doesn't take anything away from how effective SGA is. He's still super effective. It's just not as fun to watch. And it's something that plenty of unbiased fans, and not just unbiased fans, I shouldn't say that. Fans are inherently they're inherently biased. Unbiased analysts who have said the same thing. You don't have to look very far on X to find some analysts that feel the same way. Matt Moore and Hayes are a couple of good examples as well. Speaking of Matt Moore and Hayes, I got one more clip for you from Locked On NBA. Of course, you can go check that show out daily, Monday through Friday. Go find it on YouTube, on Locked On NBA on YouTube. But the Locked On NBA show, they do a fantastic job. Different hosts throughout the week, and different contributors throughout the week. But in this clip, Matt talks a little bit about how you can't go small against OKC. And I'll push back a little bit on this, but I'll play Matt's clip here first.
Finch got caught up in this idea that you're going to be able to play small ball with OKC. You're not. You're never going to win going small versus OKC. It's a path to doom. Their game plan, they were sloppy.
So I generally agree with the premise that going small against OKC is a fool's errand because they are so good. They swarm so well, and their small lineup is so effective. They've got so many interchangeable, switchable pieces. And Minnesota, in theory, can do the same thing because Nas at the 5. But Nas at the 5 is not a great proposition so far against the Thunder. I know in the crossover episode on Tuesday, Rylan Stiles of Locked On Thunder was worried about Nas and thought he was kind of this boogeyman that could destroy them in small ball. And Nas hasn't been very good for much of the playoffs, really going back to the first part of the Lakers series. They gained one good game against Golden State, but he hasn't been good in a while. And that makes me a little bit nervous. Yeah. But my pushback to Matt's point is this. Minnesota won twice against OKC in the regular season, and they did not have Rudy Gobert or Julius Randle in either of those games. So they were playing small. It was Nas getting 20 and 10. It was smaller lineups that included Jalen Clark plus Ant plus Nikhil on the floor plus, and I think two of those games didn't have Mike Conley either. Two of those 3 games in February. So the Wolves did win playing small. Now, OKC didn't have Chet in one of those games that the Wolves won. Actually, I think just one of them. And they didn't have Hartenstein either. So both teams were playing smaller, but that's kind of the point Matt's making is you can't beat them at that game. And it is when things did start to go haywire. Remember, Hartenstein and Holmgren were both in foul trouble in the third quarter, and OKC went small almost out of necessity, and it worked out really well for them because they dominated on the perimeter. They were able to get steals. They were able to swarm Julius Randle and pick his pocket. They were able to trap Ant and push him off balance in the really at the timeline as soon as he crossed midcourt. They were able to do all those things. I don't think it was Chris Finch getting caught up in it as much as it was. Well, I guess you could make the argument that is. I don't feel like it played out that way. I thought it was the right button to push at that time. Minnesota was struggling to score, and so he said, "Look, let's put Niles on the floor, see if he can find something. If he can catch fire, we're in great shape. Randall's been great. Put these guys on the floor together." It didn't work out, and I don't think that's generally a winning proposition over the course of the series. I think it's a button you can push, and you can steal some minutes that way. Especially if like SGA is not on the floor or whatever. Like I think that is feasible, but it's not overall a winning proposition. But the pushback against Matt is it did work to an extent in a small sample in the regular season. And the other thing is Rudy Gobert, to I guess back up Matt's point, something else to consider is the on-off numbers are all better with Rudy in the playoffs. Like Rudy is a positive player for Minnesota in the playoffs. He's actually fourth on the team in on-off over at Basketball Reference. And all the starters, by the way, are the top 5. The bench guys have not been good. DiVincenzo's been the worst one, although I think he's had a couple of nice moments, especially defensively, not shooting the ball, of course, overall in the playoffs. But I think that the Rudy on-off stuff is pretty interesting. And he was good in this game, too, overall. I mean, we talked about this on the show on Wednesday, the post-game pod. Like, Rudy was only a -2. That was actually the second best mark of anybody on the Timberwolves, next to Mike Conley's +5. Mike was the only guy that was a positive plus-minus in a 26-point loss. Rudy was only a -2 in 21 minutes. So I don't know that necessarily means you lean more into that. I think the offensive rebounding piece could be a bigger deal. I mean, Rudy only had 1 offensive rebounded in 21 minutes. He also got a foul like 2 minutes into the game, less than 2 minutes into the game, shoving, I think it was Hartenstein in the back, trying to get an offensive rebound. I think that crops up a bit more here in game 2. All right, let's close. I think the Wolves do win game 2. I do think it's a win for Minnesota. I know they're 7.5-point underdogs. I think they win the game. I do think that they're a good enough road team. They believe in what they're doing. We've seen kind of this feeling out game for better or for worse. Game 2 against the Lakers, game 1 against the Warriors. There were a lot of parallels between OKC, or at least the last quarter and a half against OKC in game 1 to those games. I know the Thunder are a different animal than the Lakers. I know they're a very different animal than these Steph-less Warriors. I get that. But I think I know Minnesota is better than what they were in game 1 of the series. I know they're going to make more threes. I think Rudy's going to be on the floor a little bit more. And I think the Timberwolves will take just a little bit better care of the ball. You got to avoid those live ball turnovers. If you slow the game down and they force you into shot clock violation, that is better than, a wild pass to try and get a shot attempt up before the buzzer, the 3-point clock. Because how many of those rebounds were they getting off of late clock attempts for Minnesota where it's a fast break the other way? And how many times are they turning the ball over late clock, right? Like slow the pace of the game down even more. Keep Rudy in the game as much as you can. I think those are things that could help Minnesota. I don't know that you do anything different coverage-wise defensively. It was really good until the point of attack defense faltered in the second half. We talked about that on yesterday's show. I think it will be better in this game. And again, I'd pick Minnesota to win and even the series at 1 apiece, heading back to Minnesota with momentum for a showdown on Saturday night. All right, that's all we got for you today on the show. I'll be back on Friday. We'll do the post-game pod, talking all things Game 2, Wolves Thunder. Of course, the live postcast with Jack and Luke over at Locked On Sports Minnesota on YouTube will be live just immediately following the game, and then that audio will be here on this feed, actually the next episode in your audio feed at Locked On Wolves will be that postcast with Jack and Luke, and I'll be back on Friday morning early with the post-game pod. A big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. And also for your second listen, you can check out Locked On NBA Big Board. That show includes NBA draft expert Rafael Barlow reacting to every workout, interview, and rumor leading up to the NBA draft. Find Locked On NBA Big Board on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. Of course, the Locked On Wolves podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.